Hey, what's up, guys? This is Brian at Brian's Tech Therapy. Thank you so much for joining me. Today's video is actually a predictions video for the upcoming Value Electronics King of TV for 2022 Shootout, both 4K and 8K. This amazing event will take place Saturday, July 30th, Sunday, July 31st. Saturday portion will be for 4K starting at 9 a.m. Sunday will be also at 9 a.m. for 8K, and then concluding with an overall champion between the 4K and the 8K to give you the king of TVs. This was supposed to be a short predictions video with Stop the FOMO as my special guest. We continue discussing. We will give you our winners at the very end of the video. It is very long, but I think the discussion itself is very valuable. This is the way we talk about displays off camera. We just happened to record it. That's why it wasn't a live stream. So it really is unedited. If you want to see who we want to pick at the end, go right to the end of the video. But more importantly, let me know who you think wins this amazing event. Let me know in the comments who you think wins 4K, 8K, and why, and then your overall. Let me know why you picked that manufacturer and that particular panel. Please leave that in the comments. Again, it's a very long video, but I think the information in it is the way many of you guys discuss panels, and it has a different flow. It's not like our live streams. It's almost like a private conversation that we happen to record. I hope you guys enjoy it. Again, look for the actual shootout, which isn't open to the public this year. Value Electronics Shootout. It will be streamed live on Shane at SpareChange. Check the description for Shane's channel. He will be streaming from 9 a.m. till the end Saturday and 9 a.m. on Sunday all the way to the end. That will be uninterrupted footage. Again, not open to the public. You'll be able to see the entire shootout as it plays out. I hope you guys tune in this weekend. Special thank you to Robert and Wendy Zone of Value Electronics. Special thanks to Stop the FOMO for jumping in this video with me. I hope you guys enjoy. I will see you in the comments. Love you guys. Stop the FOMO. FOMO, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you, Brian?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We have not been on camera in some time, but we are going to see each other in person this weekend in Manhattan. I know you've been traveling all over the place. You've been in the Midwest. We will talk about that at the end of the video. You have some exciting things happening on your channel today. What I am looking from you, and I do want your honest replies to this, is what you think the winners of the Value Electronics Shootout will be in Manhattan. What predictions you are feeling for both the 4K and the 8K. We both had a lot of experience with pretty much the entire lineup. Quickly, let me know what you think, what you're looking to expect. I know you're traveling. Can't wait to see you in person. It's been almost a year. How are you? Let me know what you're thinking.
Well, first of all, I am so looking forward to seeing you in New York City, right? It's last year we were there together. It was so much fun. Me, you, Brandon, the gang.
Yeah,
this year we expect to double the fun. We'll be there again. So I'm so excited to see you just going bar hopping and all the great things after the shootout. Now, as far as the shootout itself, I think it's so important to let our viewers know that no single winner, I mean, maybe one TV could be a single winner, but I wanted to focus on the categories because I think it's so important that a TV cannot do everything well. So for me, my most important category is normally skin tones and HDR impact, right? And skin tones really has to do with color accuracy to a certain degree. And we could talk about this. At what point does HDR impact, how much am I willing to give up in color accuracy to get HDR impact or vice versa, right? So my prediction is HDR impact maybe this year will go to the QN95B because I think that's Samsung's contribution for the 4K flagship. And possibly either the S95B or the QD-OLED might take that crown because it might have similar HDR impact, but bring with it the color tonal ranges that may not be available on the QN95B. But that depends on the content. So that's something we'll have to look at. And in the 8K HDR impact, again, I think the brightest TV wins. In this case, my prediction is the Z9K. Now, the king of TVs is normally one that kind of dominates all the categories, or rather the good at all trades, right? Jack of all trades, far above average, but the master of none. that could end up being the Sony A95K. That's my prediction.
Okay, so I know last year we had the Sony A90J Master Series, which I think we agreed was the
Right.
winner. And then we had the ZX at the 8K, which I thought we all agreed won that as well. I do feel the competition is much closer this year. I thought the G1 was very good last year, but I thought the A90J was clearly a step ahead with the heatsink and its
Yep.
processor. But this year, the lineup in 4K is you're looking at the X95K, the A95K, the G2, the
Hmm.
S95B, and the QN95B. Those are all so close this year. I mean, last year we had kind of an outlier. We had the dual cell, the dual cell, the Hisense was in there.
Yeah, that was
So this year, I feel like we have two mini LEDs going at it. And then we have two quantum OLEDs going at it. And then you have this G2, which is really the best OLED we've seen, WOLED with the heatsink. So I think that's a very tight group in 4K.
Now, you brought up something about last year that is very dear to my heart, which was I felt that the judges were not given, or rather, the emphasis on HDR impact was not properly emphasized
Okay.
to the judges, because I felt that the QN90A last year had the most HDR impact for its
Yeah.
category, and
Yeah.
yet it didn't come close to beating the other two OLEDs. And I was like, wait, this scene, everything is moving so fast. And we're talking about the pan scene where the ship is sailing in the sunset. First, what does it matter what color the ship or the sunset is?
Yeah.
Because everything is moving fast, but the sun just strikes you in the face
Yeah.
in the QN90A, whereas the other OLEDs, I mean, they were barely bright enough, and definitely the specular highlights within the bright scene just wasn't there. And so for some reason, I just felt that the judges were still focused on color accuracy, which, yes, the
Yeah.
QN90A did not have the color accuracy, but what does it matter? And here's something to think about. The reference monitor hard clips at 1,000 nits, which
Yeah.
means when it hits 1,000, the monitor isn't getting brighter. It just, boom, all details lost.
Yep.
And in that scene, that the pan scene, it's above 1,000 nits. So subjective HDR impact. This year, I want to have a talk with the judges and sit down with maybe Robert and talk about, well, what are you guys looking for in HDR impact? What is impact to you? How much of color accuracy is important? I'm not going to say abandon it, right? Green is suddenly blue. Like, obviously,
Yeah,
that's
of
not
course.
acceptable. But maybe you could lose a little saturation, but the brightness makes up the difference. So what are your thoughts on HDR impact? Because I'm hoping this year we can give bright TVs a fair shake.
So that was, I know you and I talked about this when we first met about LEDs being close to my heart, and that it became so much about contrast ratio. So obviously OLEDs will always win it. That the calibration of the LEDs seem to take away that peak brightness. Take
Mhm.
away. So, and we talked about peak brightness with LEDs being 3D, where with OLEDs, it's almost painted on the screen. You can feel the brightness, but you can't feel the heat in a way. So I would like to see the LEDs run wild and let them go again, to have them look as similar as possible being calibrated. It's amazing how close they'll look. But I do think you're right. I think there should be a category where those displays can really show their muscle. And then you'll see the Z9K, the QN90B, the 900B really separate themselves. And when we see those specular highlights, that's when we're watching it in a dark room, you're like, oh my God. Because the Z9K is blindingly bright. I mean, go ahead.
Oh, well, right when you said, when you talked about LEDs near and dear to your heart, it also struck me what we talk about. When is it we want people to get an LCD LED TV where, LED backlighting, floor local dimming, gets super bright? But we're always talking about, this is for most people, their use cases, they're in a bright room, they're in a kitchen,
Yeah.
floor to ceiling lights and windows are everywhere.
Yeah.
OLED black levels are wasted because you're never going to get that shadow detail to black in a dark room. You're going to lose all of that.
Yeah.
So the brightest TVs actually end up looking better thanks to the additional brightness above the APL for watching sports and all that stuff.
Yep.
And so the viewers have to keep in mind that this shootout really is for darkroom watching. The
Yeah.
results come about from a gamma of 2.4, 2.3. That means a dark room.
Hmm.
But if you're in a brighter room, we're talking gamma of 2.0, 1.8, right?
Yeah.
This is bright room watching. We're not giving the King of TVs award to a bright room TV. This is an award for a dark room TV.
Yeah.
Now, I
It's
watch
for,
my TV in a dark room, like as do you.
yeah.
So this
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
so whatever TV wins is relevant to us. But for
Yeah.
those of you who are thinking, I want to get the king of TVs, but you're sitting in a bright kitchen, I don't know, you might be disappointed.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know Robert, he's going to try and get that email to me tonight, and I'll be able to attach it to this video. The ballot is a little different this year, and
Okay,
I
good.
believe he'll be able to use it as almost a buyer's guide for people. That way, they are going to talk more about reflection handling this year. They are going to address some of that, viewing angle, things like that. So, to your point, yes, it has been more of a home theater because we do check them in a dark room. I knew they're going to have pre-calibration numbers and then posts. So that'll all be together this year. But no, you bring up an excellent point, and I know gaming has become a bigger concern with a lot of people. And I'm very happy that Sony's finally got their VRR updates done, and they've also helped the local dimming of some of these panels, so we can now recommend them instead of that being the elephant in the room. So the
Right.
Z9K and now the X95K can be brought into the gamers part. But I do think you're right. It does come down to the best home theater display. And obviously, we're focusing on the highest end. I know you and I talked about lower end panels down the road being an interesting contest to see. Not lower end, actually, just mid range for that
Mhm.
matter, which would be, your 8 series, things of that nature. But share with me now, and we're about 13 minutes on, just your experiences with the lineups that you've seen at home. I know we've together experienced the S95B, the
Mhm.
QD-OLED, which has been a roller coaster, which we'll see if that plays a part as it goes against the A95K, which is a mature QD-OLED now, where the Samsung has gone through 3-4 updates since its launch. Speak to me a little bit about what you've seen with the S95B in person since the day you and I unboxed it together online.
I honestly don't know where Samsung's going with the S95B, because when we unboxed it together, and this is the first time you and I saw images from this TV, right? I waited until I got you on, and immediately I was struck by how bright and saturated and everything was. And we know it was uncalibrated. Obviously, I'm sure it's a little off. There was a little bit of red push,
Mhm.
but it was just the overall brightness and the impact measured 1500 nits across all picture modes, peak specular highlights. The APL, average picture level, is very high. And I felt the ABL was not as aggressive. Now, it could be my imagination, but nevertheless, out of the box, before any firmware updates, we were wowed. Just over YouTube, you were wowed. And then
Oh,
over
yeah.
the course of many firmware updates, the TV was pulled back significantly in terms of brightness, and its aggressiveness of ABL, I believe, may have increased, all of which goes towards making sure that the TVs last longer.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was Samsung going in and saying, you know what, let's make it a worse experience for everyone.
Yeah.
That's
And
the whole
I,
theory, right?
and I don't think they were doing a bait and switch. But what's so funny is that organically that night, the only drawback you gave the panel very early in our conversation was, will this thing last?
Mm-hmm.
Because there wasn't a heatsink. But I just find it interesting this year. If you talk about our TV year, we started off with the C2,
Mm-hmm.
G2. LG was poised to have their mature panel this year. Both came out great. Then the Samsung comes in, turns the whole world upside down.
Yep.
But they were supposed to release that panel at the end of the year, maybe next year. They snuck it in. You got one almost like a PlayStation 5 where you were like, oh, it's in my box. Oh my God, I have it.
Right,
Because you
right.
literally called me. You're like, hey, are you free tonight? I have this thing. And then it was this whole roller coaster of us loving it. And then me getting one in person and loving it more. And then having this discrepancy of accuracy versus it being
Mhm.
a light Canon versus color saturation. And then it being pulled back in only one picture mode. But I would told you my experience with it when I compared it to the A80K, it felt like a completely different beast than what I had experienced maybe a month and a half earlier.
Now, you know what? Give me a second. I'm going to adjust my camera a second so you
Sure,
can
go
edit
ahead.
that part out.
That's all right. We'll leave it.
Yeah,
We show how it really rolls.
when it comes to video, it bothers me that my head is not centered with the image. I'm like, I can't do this. Wait 1 second. I'm gonna have to
Go ahead,
zoom in a
fix
little bit
it.
more. I need to match myself to you,
Yeah,
and it's just not happening. So
yeah, yeah. You want me to go farther back?
no. I'm good. I'm good. There we go. All right, much better. Okay,
Perfect.
so I somehow feel I'm better matched to you now.
Nice.
Okay, so
So the S95B, different animal. When I saw it in its purest form very shortly after you had reviewed it and spent time with it, and I was shocked. I was blown away. It actually, I have content that I filmed before that I still need to release.
Mhm.
That's how much it knocked us off the ball. And
Yep.
then the A95K then drifted into, it was delayed. So then we had rumors that it wasn't as good, it wasn't as bright.
Mhm.
And then it was Samsung S95B only. And then
Mhm.
it started getting these hits. And then the G2 mysteriously kind of jumps in front. Or the QN, I should say that, let me start back over. The QN90B was on fire before the S95. Then the QN90B gets hit with a firmware update bug of some kind that we thought might be a hardware update. So it's been the most flip-floppy year I've ever seen in TVs.
Yeah.
I should say, and not flip-floppy due to reviewers, but of the narrative of the baseline of what we think. Like G2 was like, can't go wrong. Then it was, it's just a little bit brighter. It looks kind of the same. Then all of a sudden, now it's the better one. So, and then now having the A95K come out at the end, having no updates, seems like it's now the front runner. So, where are you on that with the A95 coming out, or even the narrative with the TV year?
So what I find is interesting with the A95K is it shares the same technology as the S95B. And once both of them are calibrated, how much does Sony's heatsink are attributed towards raising the peak specular highlights or the APL average picture level, and how much of that heatsink is really towards longevity and does nothing for picture quality? Let's say it does nothing. If it does nothing for picture quality, like the heatsink, and Sony relies purely on its XR chip, what we're going to find is that the S95B and the Sony will be nearly indistinguishable in most scenes, short of posterization, right, where you have color banding, all that stuff. That's very much a Sony processor thing. Motion. So if you take those two things out, and if you look at action movies, Mad Max, you can be hard pressed to find a difference. If you look at more subtle movies like The Greatest Showman, where skin tones are a big deal, maybe color accuracy out of the box could be a big deal, then the Sony A95K will step up. But if you calibrate the S95B, so now you have a level playing field in terms of calibrated colors, what more can Sony bring to the table beyond image processing? And a lot of people say, well, I love image processing. In any given movie, there's very few scenes where
Yeah.
that is important throughout the whole movie. You have those shadow details here and there, but ultimately you're not going to notice those things. We're pixel peepers. That's what we do.
Yep.
And so we point it out, but if you watch a movie with the two TVs side by side, more than half the time you'll be like, which is which again? And
Yeah.
so this is an issue for the A95K as far as the value. However, Google TV, Sony Motion, but then S95B, gaming, and gaming.
Yep, of
So,
course. Yeah.
right? I mean, you really have your use case. Not to say the A95K cannot be a gaming TV. Obviously it could be,
Yep.
but it's not designed with the UI. It's not an easy experience, right? You'll have the same complaints. You're going to go in there,
Yeah, it's Dolby
manually
Vision.
change
Yep.
it, right? Turn
Disable.
off
Yep.
Dolby Vision. I mean,
Mhm.
it's
Yep.
so wonky.
Yeah, it's
So
arduous.
yeah, but then the Tizen and S95B, yeah, over time it'll get better. There's no perfect TV, but there is one thing that is unassailable, which is the Sony's costing about $1,200 more at least than the
Yeah.
S95B right now, during even after Prime Day, $2,400 for the S95B, and Sony's launching this week at $4,000 for the same size TV.
Yeah.
That's $1,600 more. I can see 600 more. I
Yep.
could
Yep.
see, I mean, I could. That's about as much as I can see. I cannot justify 1600 more. And I think that's an issue. And over time, it's a recent launch. Maybe it will get down to 3000. I don't see it going ever below 3. And I think that's okay. 3000, 3100, 3200. That's 600 separation. But then, have you seen the A95K? You have, right?
I have. And going into that conversation, I will say, here's the thing that Samsung does really well. They usually come out high price-wise, but they come out so much earlier than everybody else that by the time the other flagships come out, they're hitting their second and third price drop almost every year. And this year, releasing the S95B at such an affordable price. But the design of the panel, its build quality, it's very thin. We've had a lot of reports of warping, it's beautiful. It's very thin, simplistic. I would say the A95K, seeing them next to each other, feels much more premium. The thickness doesn't bother me at all. The base I do like a lot. It just feels like a Master Series. You are getting the camera, the heatsink. So I think that brings them a little closer. But yeah, the Master Series has always been a badge of expensive and hey, expect to pay more. And releasing so late in the year, they really can't take a hit releasing close to the Samsung. But when I see them next to each other, the quality of the two builds is obvious, even though I do prefer, though like the G2 versus the C2, I do prefer the more OLED look of the thin panels versus the thick G2. But I do find, to your point, once they're calibrated the same, you'll see it. What did jump out at me, FOMO, versus when I first saw the S95 was the A95K wasn't hitting me with that light cannon brute force, but it did have this beautiful 3D saturated, amazing. But it wasn't, when I saw the S95, I was like, wow, look at the color. Oh my God, it's so bright. And there was no picture quality issues. There was no trailing, no motion problems. The A95K reminded me of a juiced up A90J.
Now,
if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And you mentioned something that I should also have mentioned about the premium. I was just focused on the picture quality, but you're right. A lot of that 1600, what if we said that the Sony was designed to last a few more years in the S95B? Would that justify the additional $1,000? And I think it could, right? So let's say 5 years from now, and not to say this would happen, but for the sake of argument, 5 years from now, the S95B starts to fall apart, and the Sony A95K goes on strong. In the 5th year, owners of A95K would say it was worth every penny, that extra $1,000. And I think, again, if that happens, that's why you pay. Now, that's not to say that Sony's not going to fail earlier.
No. Well,
the sync is the long game. It's for the long game for Sony.
Well, and we talked about Master Series. The idea with Master Series is you're paying a lot because they're supposed to last 2 years. They get their own little, but that hasn't been true lately. We do, Z9J, Z9K. So when you buy one of these panels, I know we have a lot of people that bought A90Js that were very upset because, hey, I paid so much money. You still have a Master Series that is a legacy model, but it doesn't mean we're all going to see panels come out next year that are going to be cheaper than the current A95K. That's a fact. And that, I think, is hard for people. So just know, guys, if you're watching, if you make that purchase, you can't then feel foolish or then try to defend your panel because you spent a lot of money on it. Like the A90J, whenever I see the A90J now, it still turns my head.
I still feel foolish for getting the 8K Q900 TS from 2 years ago. I was like, man, I was convinced that all the additional dimming zones and processing and not the 8K, but at least the other stuff didn't make a difference. It looked worse than my Q90. That was a slap in the face for me.
I will say, though, the 900 TS and the year after, their build quality, they were beautiful panels.
Oh, yeah.
Where the build quality on Samsung's the panels this year, I'm not loving them. I'm not loving this. Like it has the side.
There's definitely a difference, especially the second tier TVs. So you have like the Q95B and Q90B.
Yeah.
The drop to the Q85B, there is a drop. There's something to be said about paying a few hundred more for the flagship experience.
Well, the Q90B, which I have here, has a plastic back. But the 900B and the QN95B have almost like a fuzzy back to it. I think it's all recycled parts, but it just doesn't feel quite as premium. And then when you pick up a Z9K, then you're like, okay, this thing feels more solid. So it all depends on, I guess my point is when you talk about price, I think that eventually comes into the Master Series tend to stay expensive much longer. Supposed to, yeah. So let's go back to what we were saying. Let's jump out of 4K quickly. I want to jump into the 8K lineup. What have you heard? We're looking at the QN900B. I think the 8K has improved. Samsung is now in their second generation mini LED 8K.
Yes,
this is their second.
A better processor.
Processor.
So I don't have the QN900B yet at the 65-inch size, but the few other reviewers that we know and love who have it and have reviewed it and have reviewed the QN90B before it, pretty much this time around, unlike my 900 TS, the dimming zones do make a difference. So this is something I'm going to have to ask you about this. I found it to be disappointing that QN90B's local dimming, processing, blooming slightly below the QN90A. Now, in some it's better. The black bars, in some scenes, the QN90B had better black bars than the QN90A. In other scenes, though, you see a little bit more blooming, less blooming control. But then on those same scenes in the QN900B, rock solid. So the question is, is it because of additional dimming zones? I don't think so, because the Q98 nailed those scenes before. Possibly is the 90B being just let loose a little bit so the 900B can really stand out? Because remember my complaint, the 900 TS couldn't beat the 90A. Well, they fixed that. Go back to 4K a little bit. I don't know, man.
If you think about what you're saying, it's funny. Instead of making this better, let's hurt the other one. It's like being two athletes and you're like kicking the other guy's leg out. See, you're faster now. You're faster now, but my leg is broken. It's an interesting point, though. And I know I do have a video planned with you with Samsung, so we don't have to spend a ton of time on Samsung because we do have a video planned for that. This is my issue with Samsung is the QN90A was, if you look at last year's professional reviewers, our crew, everybody, if you got the panel at the end of the year, it was a different animal than it was in the beginning of the year for the better. Same with the QN900A, for that matter, was a much better animal. It seems this year we're having the opposite, where the QN90B that I have a little one, and it's awesome. I think it's better.
It's awesome as well.
Yeah, so I think it's better. I think it has improvements because the specular highlights just seem a little sharper, where I felt like in the QN90A, even the 100-inch or 98-inch, it would almost flatten out specular highlights to hide the blooming. Where with Sony, they let those specular highlights run wild, but so does the blooming. So you pick your poison. But my experience with 8K panels, the 900R, they would almost look matte at times. They wouldn't look as bright as the 90R at the time. That seemed to have more of a QLED look to it. But this year, what we're saying with the S9, or I'm jumping back quickly to the 4K, is I believe the QN95 does have the 8K processor, the step-up processor, and it does have the One Connect box. I know we are on our second. We went through the panel that I had unboxed. We unboxed the second one for the shootout to make sure we didn't have that same bug you had with the Q90B. So the one that's going to be there should be the appropriate one. But staying quickly with 8K, what are your thoughts on the Z2, the Z9K from what you're hearing, and where you think 8K kind of is?
So the Z9K, not having heard about the measurements, but we know how much measurements reflect real-world content. But even if it's slightly brighter than last year's Z9J, it'll be the brightest TV we've seen. The only question is whether is it 75-inch we're going to have the shootout, or 85-inch?
This year, luckily this year it's all 80 and up. So it's 88 and then 285.
As we know, changing with size, brightness measurements change for whatever reason. And it's possible that the Q900B at 85 inches could be really bright, but whether it can get as bright as a Z9K, that's why we're at the shootout. I don't know. I know on measurements it's possible Z9K gets brighter, but we're going to put out real content to see if that makes a difference in movies. graded to 4,000 nits, like Mad Max, let's say, right? Or the pan scene. There'll be and few scenes. There's not a lot, but we'll pull out those few scenes where you have a bright full screen, and then in that bright screen you have an even brighter specular highlight.
Yep.
OLED cannot touch that, and even among LCD TVs, among LED TVs, only the best, brightest TV with great contrast can demonstrate super bright against a bright background. And that's where Z9K and the Q900B will put the Z2 to shame.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because Z2 is still an OLED and it doesn't have a heatsink. So there is no way it could hit full screen brightness. Now, the peak specular highlights will come close, but no OLED has ever hit over 1,200 nits, even on a white anything, right? Maybe 1,300 nits if you're a QD-OLED, but just a regular WOLED, you don't break 1,000 nits without a heatsink. And the Z2 doesn't have a heatsink. The best it's going to do is 800 nits without a heatsink, maybe 900, but let's say 800. Worst case, you'll see that difference if the other two TVs are at 2,000 nits, peak specular highlight in a scene. That difference, you'll see. Why is that? Because 800 nits, double the brightness is double the nits, 1,600 nits. Both these TVs will hit 1,600 nits. 1% window, easy.
Yeah, well, and I think what's going to be great too is the Z9K and the QN900B look very different from one another. Like you can definitely see their signature. So I am interested to see, and I think last year having the much larger ZX, well, it wasn't much larger. It just had a bigger presence than the other two, Z9J and the QN900A. I do feel that gap is definitely closed. I think the mini LED, both the backlight master drive and the Samsung second with the new processor, is going to be either much closer, and I think it will outshine the Z2 in some aspects. And we'll see if the judges, as you mentioned, and we're going to speak to them, and I'll speak to the calibrators about your concern because I'm going to see them Thursday. How we're measuring that and how we're looking at it. But I do think this year those two are light cannons, and the Z9K to me impressed the hell out of me, to the point where it was my pick. It's just the gaming part of it isn't quite what I need for my use case, but it's closer than it was. But for me, my prediction, I'll just go with my prediction first. I do still feel the Z2 is going to pull ahead in the 8K category. I think just being an OLED contrast ratio, how it's going to show up. I do feel LG puts a lot of special sauce in those panels that they don't mention. I think there is, like, whatever they're using a year later, they put in there but don't say anything. But by a nose. What's your prediction for the 8K lineup this year? While we're here, we should talk about it.
So I have to remind myself, this is a darkroom prediction. OLED is designed to kill in a dark room. The special sauce is designed to be seen in a dark room. So given the dark room, let me turn this off so it doesn't get too noisy.
No, you're good.
So given the dark room, the Z2, when it comes to the shadow detail and color accuracy and the specular highlights, where you have a dark area, like most of the screen is dark, and then you have a bright specular highlight, yes, Z2 will kill it because there will be no blooming. The other two TVs will have lifted blacks and blooming in a dark room in that scene. In those scenes where you have, and we do have those scenes at the shootout where it's a bright scene, and then you have a specular highlight in those bright scenes. The other two TVs, I think, will knock my socks off, but Z2 will win, like you said, by a nose. Will win more of the other because there are color accuracy categories where the other two will have a hard time because the contrast is just not there, right? But I would love to turn on the lights and have a bright comparison. And
turn on the lights.
Where'd the Z2 go?
It would look like a mirror. Who brought this mirror in here?
Right, high gloss, right? Because we know that isn't the Z9K a semi-gloss or matte? Have you seen the Z9K?
It's still glossy. Yeah, it's not as glossy. Yeah, it's still got the glossy.
It's less glossy, right?
It's less glossy. Yeah.
And the Q900B we know has the rainbow. Oh, I don't know if the Z9K has the rainbow, but the X95K has literally the same rainbow gloss or rainbow coating.
X95J.
X95K has the same rainbow coating as the Q990B because they have them next to each other, like, and the Q98. all three TVs are like, okay, literally they sourced it from the same dude.
And
So
well, and that's that whole XY. I don't know, man. We've talked about
it's a
that being.
rainbow thing,
Yeah, I'm
right?
like, why do I need to be? I'm not watching from my kitchen, you know. But I got you. So,
Yeah.
what's the prediction? What do you have for me? Again, I know we already gave the way out for Bright Room, but do you think?
But
What do you
yeah,
think?
it'll be the Z2 because we will notice the worst contrast in a dark room. We're sensitive to contrast in dark room. In dark scenes, in a bright scene, it'll be close, but we'll still see it because the other two TVs will be way too bright. Now, obviously, they will pull. Okay, if it's calibrated in calibrated mode, the other two TVs are not supposed to be brighter, right? Because it's tracking the EOTF curve. But even then, yeah, the contrast will be visible. And then you get to HDR scenes, Z2 by a nose. Yep.
Okay. Well, what would be really interesting is if we had a QD 8K. Next year we are going to see that new lens on the LG. See, and I believe that starts with
Oh,
the.
that's the theory. That's the theory. I don't know. They're
I,
showing it off right now. It's making the rounds.
but I believe that starts with their AK. Unfortunately, with their AK lineup next year. So,
That's
and then when we talk about guys, for you, obviously making a purchase, the Z2, I believe, is
oh, wait,
20
right.
something thousand. Go ahead.
Before I forget, so you mentioned the meta lens array, whatever.
Mhm.
We can confirm it because the LG engineers will be there.
So yeah, and then so before we go into our 4K prediction,
Whether they will come on the record to answer my question is a whole other matter.
yeah, so
But
that's what's going to be interesting this year. There is going to be a lot. We'll see a lot more engineers this year because we're not going to have the flight restrictions. Last year it was we only had U.S. engineers from the manufacturers. We will have hopefully engineers from all three. We'll be
yes.
able to talk to. I am glad to be able to put the VRR conversation to rest. Though I will say for all of you out there, I will be bringing up the 900H for you. It hopefully gets a little extra love or gets brought back to some kind of, just for you 900H guys out there, I will be bringing up the 900H. But yeah, look, can't wait to talk to the engineers.
Keep the TVs for 3 years, right?
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, so much of our guys are like 900H. Because I did a video on the VRR update, and I would tell you most of the comments are like, "So, am I good with the 900H?" But yeah, it's
You
gonna
know
be.
what, I have to say, if you're asking, you don't have a problem. Because you
Yeah,
know if you're not good. You're like, oh, this sucks, right?
yeah, it just
But
they
if you
just.
can't tell, it's a good TV.
Yeah, it's still great, and it's still, yeah. We can do a whole of it, and that's near and dear to both our hearts for how we were treated for talking about that. So let's move into the 4K lineup again. Just for those watching, we have the LG G2 from LG. Their QNED lineup is not featured this year. No LEDs from them, though they do have that lineup. They did not enter it, or they won't have it entered this year. We don't know if it will be next year. So LG has one horse in the race. They also have the X95K, which is the 4K flagship. Then the A95K, which is the QD OLED, which will be taking the place of last year's A90J. Samsung then is rolling up with the QN95, which has just been released in the States. Updated processor to the QN90B and the One Connect box, as well as the famous S95. Seeing the G2 with its bright highlights and their tried and true way go against these QD OLEDs, I can't wait to see how this matchup unfolds.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to bring in a subtle point. Why I felt last year that WOLED maybe unfairly had the deck stacked against it. So remember last year when we saw that image where all the people it was a movie where people were lined up and you saw their faces, right? And you noticed that the colors of the OLED TVs, both the A90J and the G1, it was very desaturated, as if it was missing a little bit of red relative to the reference monitor, right? The reference monitor had very rich skin tones, and clearly the WOLEDs were off. I mean, color accuracy was off, but it was calibrated. So I didn't understand what was the deal. And then I find later that it's because on a WOLED, if you calibrate to D65 white point, the red is pulled down a bit, not because you're intentionally doing it, it's because the spectrum distribution curve, right? The power distribution It's not, the red isn't there. There's not enough red. This is why
Okay.
QD-OLED feels like it has more red. It's because WOLED doesn't have enough. When you take a QD-OLED and you calibrate it to D65, the red is there. You don't have to adjust anything further. On a WOLED, you will not have skin tone if you calibrate to D65. You have to go in there and then perceptually find images of skin tones. And if you want, raise it as you need to match skin tones or whatever you need to do. But now your white will be off. So with the WOLED, you have to make a choice. Perfectly calibrated white walls or
Yeah.
better looking skin tones, because a pale face is very obvious, right? And QD-OLED doesn't have that problem. The calibrate to D65, you're done. Let's move it aside. And so last year, the WOLED had that issue, but because they were all WOLEDs, it was an even playing field. We don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
This year, with QD-OLED, I'm going to talk to the calibrators and discuss with them, wait, if you guys are calibrated to D65, you know skin tones will be off. Shouldn't you perceptually match? And then that way, the skin tones will be closer, and the judges could decide whether the white walls being off is a big enough of a difference to mark it down.
Yeah.
Because as we know, as viewers, judges, just human beings, when we see these images and the faces are off, you're going to mark it down. But then in other images where there are no faces, there might be, I don't know, waves, water, anything that's white, it'll show that it is slightly off. But so what do you think? What would you prefer on the WOLED to give it a fighting chance against QD-OLED? Because you can't
It's a
calibrate to a white wall, it'll be a perfect white wall, or perfectly calibrated or near perfully calibrated face.
well now
What
I'm
would
like, I
you
don't know. I'm
have
trying to
both?
think of how many movies I'm watching with these white walls.
Exactly,
So,
right?
unless I'm watching Shutter Island, I don't know how much of that I'm gonna
Oh,
have.
remember that scene where you have the sand, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
what's her name? The I forgot the name. The school for gifted children, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah,
you have
yeah,
the
yeah.
bright sand, the waves. Okay, the sand will be a little bit off. Maybe the waves, the white waves, slightly off, right? But do you care? I mean, is it
Yeah.
okay that your white, your sand might be a little bit too red? You're not going to tell. You know, the sand's just going to be a darker sand versus a lighter sand. I'll take that. But
Yeah.
then if you don't do that and your face is a bit paler, I don't like that. And you know, the argument is, well, you don't have the reference, it looked natural. But knowing I'm missing red in those faces, it bothers me.
So I'm gonna bring. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be there to Thursday evening when Jason Dustle arrives. So
Yes.
what I'll do is if you want, let's conference you in or make a phone call maybe that night. Just
Yeah.
get a chance
Well,
to just.
we've been talking about that. It's funny
Oh,
you mentioned
you and Jason have?
well about HDR impact.
Yes,
So
HDR Impact. Yes. Okay.
we've been talking about how important is HDR impact to the creator's intent in those scenes that are obvious HDR impact versus absolute color accuracy, where you pull down the impact to preserve gradients, right? I mean,
Yeah.
wouldn't you rather push it until it clips, but you hit that max brightness? Because yeah, so it clips, so who cares? It's like bam, because it's literally
Yeah.
1 to 2 seconds of bam. You're not gonna, ooh, look, I'm missing,
Nah.
color of
And
yellow in the sun, right?
And to your point, that's where I am with audio. I listen to people think this is reference volume. I'm like, well, my shirt needs to move. My sub has to, so turn it up. I don't care if it clips or whatever, if it's accurate. I want to knock my socks off. That's where I always felt HCR impact. But I always thought that was the misconception of HCR. HCR was kind of touted as this brighter, dynamic contrast. And then you're like, oh no, it's color. Oh no, it's this. And no, it's that. And people are like, why is HDR darker in my movies? Well, yeah, but look how much brighter that torch is. You're like, but I can't see anything.
Right. All I see is the torch. What about the rest of the room?
So I feel like, yeah, so I feel like that's where we are now with QD-OLED. And that struck me when I first saw the A95K. And I know Caleb had alluded to this in
So
his last video.
before I forget, I
But
have to stop you right there. HDR was graded and is meant to be watched in a dark room. That's why you cannot see the dark details. The minute you watch HDR in a bright room, you're not supposed to see it because everything is bright in your room. All the dark that is normally visible in a dark room are no longer visible because your eyes are adjusting to the brightest part of the scene
yeah,
and the room. So you have to raise the brightness of the TV, which throws everything off, but it's okay. You want to see it.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
you have two choices, right? You go to SDR and make it brighter, or you go into LG's Cinema Home, or you go into vivid mode. But
yeah.
at this point, forget color accuracy. You just want to see the
Oh, yeah.
darkest areas raised up. I mean, there are ways to do that, but in a bright room, you're no longer really HD. You're not the HDR as the creator intended. So a person sitting in a bright room yelling and screaming, "I want creator's intent." Well, you've already screwed it up.
Yeah, no, exactly. And to me, I don't, and I know we've all talked about this. I don't. When I buy that movie, it's mine.
Yes,
Do what I want
do
with it.
whatever you want.
I'll throw some live color in there. I'm not afraid. And it just reminded me of the first time I watched was a Vizio P series, that 3000 nits. I remember being like, wow. And then you would deal with all the noise after whenever people were talking.
The noise, the TV not turning on,
And then it would turn off.
The static.
So interesting side point before we go into the 4K predictions is I had an interview with Robert's Own the other day talking about the shootout. I had, for those of you, I know we're late in the video, but hopefully you'll watch this far in. There's a lot of talk about Sony winning the last 3 years and feeling like it's a pro Sony thing. I did not know that the shootout is 19 years old and Sony has won a total of 3 times. So plasmas dominated much of that. Samsung plasmas, Panasonic plasmas, and I will say this. I'll say this as nicely as I can. Panasonic, you can't win if you don't play. And Robert has a great relationship with Panasonic and would still bring in their current OLED to the shootout, even if they're not sold. So when people tell me I can't say there's a king of TVs because this one is accurate in the UK, if you're not in, I mean, these other panels are available all over the world.
And every country has a king. There is no emperor of the world.
Yeah, so exactly.
But king of North America is Sony, and then the king of wherever, Europe, Africa, wherever Panasonic is sold, maybe somebody else. It's okay.
Yeah,
more than one king.
But I mean, everyone's like, please, when you announce the king, like I'm going to be announcing them. Make sure that I step aside and go, well, if Panasonic was here, guys, Panasonic is not here. And like I said, we tried to get them here. And even Robert had said that. I did not realize this. He invites Panasonic, Hisense, even TCL. They're invited to bring their panels. From what Robert says, Hisense was not ready this year to bring a panel out. TCL wasn't interested or didn't have a specific one they wanted to send. Robert's had Vizios in this years before. They had Master Series kind of Vizios. So it's not that there's an elitist part of it that's only covering these 3 brands. We are only going for the flagships, but there would be, every manufacturer is invited, whether they are sold by Robert or not. I did not know that myself. I know Hisense was there last year, though he did sell the dual cell and had the short throw. But, by default, these are the guys that are there.
I think that you bring a very good point in terms of inviting TV makers. But here's the thing. Every TV maker or TV engineer, TV designer, they have an objective in mind. So if the TV model specifically is designed for the best bright room watching possible, it's a setup for them. They know that if they give Robert one of their TVs to compare, they don't have their best technologies on display because it was designed to kill it in a bright room. Mm-hmm. I guarantee the minute Robert says, okay, that was dark room, that was king of the dark room, or king of the dark room in North America. But if you go to king of the
beaches
room,
Kenya, in Kenya, what we have here,
Brazil, right?
Yeah, Brazil's got plasma.
You then have king of the bright room watching, because the reality is, if you're going to watch in a dark room, that TV technically will not perform as well in a bright room, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay. So now, I know these shootouts run long enough. I don't know if there's ever time, but it's something that viewers, though, need to consider is we crown the king of dark room watching, even if it's a Panasonic. If it's an OLED, if the OLED wins, it's dark room watching. But I don't think non-OLEDs can win because they're designed not to be watched in a dark room. It's just how it is. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to these other makers coming on board, but I think they will once Robert, maybe day 2, is bright room watching plus 8K, because 8K, I mean, I cannot imagine 8K going as long as 4K.
No, well, I do think way we can do it, even though we're in a pretty big room, is actually get some professional lighting and then just switch them on at that part of the show. We actually can do that and probably should do that at some point.
Oh yeah,
And that's easy to do.
yeah. Get some
So
lanterns, giant lanterns,
yeah,
right?
yeah, just
300-watt lanterns. Get 4 of them. Just throw them around the room.
yeah,
Boom.
start a
And then you
fire.
run us running around with our cell phones,
Look,
anti-glare.
you see me. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that can actually be something that would be very easy to do, actually,
Right.
for the judges.
Yeah.
Pop the
Which
lights
TV
on.
is most enjoyable to watch with Brian and Fomo running around with the cell phone
Yeah,
light,
exactly. It's like,
right?
oh,
Because
move
wow,
that guy.
that's the least distracting winner. Because you got these, that's real life happening, right? Kids running around with
Yep.
flashlights, whatever.
All right, so we have 8K, we have the Z2. We both think we'll eke it out. I don't think it'll
Yes.
blow it away. I think to your point, I think with you, your point is we're only looking at it in a dark room. I think in all conditions, the Z2 wins simply because I think to your point, the criteria is more towards overall picture quality, where I do feel like peak brightness and specular highlights
Here-
should
Here's
be.
something for you, because I think we I forgot to mention, because we kind of skipped over it because we don't like talking about the X95K and the Q90B, because the OLED exists, right? But let's say there's no OLED. X95K, this is Sony's entry-level backlight master drive 4K TV. Q90B, the Neo QLED flagship, or the Q95B. Okay, this is what I've noticed. I'm going to ask you what your preference is. I now see the difference, what Sony is doing with its blooming, right? So in scenes where there is blooming on the X95K, not all scenes, but many scenes, within that blooming, there is actually shadow detail, color gradients. I mean, there is things in the blooming, and Sony does not want to lose those things.
Yep.
The Samsung sometimes, not all the time, crushes out a lot of that detail.
Yeah.
Their recent update helped a lot, but it's not absolute. The Sony will still bring out a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and their processing is a little bit cleaner in the blooming. So you still have blooming, but the color detail, the gradients, everything is cleaner. In the Samsung, it's perfectly black. There's some detail, but there's a bit more graininess,
Yeah.
pixelization.
It almost flattens it out again.
Right. But then you don't have any blooming. So the question,
Yeah.
because now I see when Sony says, we are willing to live with blooming, but we're not going to give up on color detail.
Yeah.
So for you, which do you prefer? Sony's approach and I'm not talking a little blooming, noticeable blooming, or
Yep.
Samsung, which is like, we believe humans do not like blooming, regardless of the minute
Yeah.
detail. We're gonna crush it out, give you a little bit of shadow detail, and call it a day. Where would you side on that?
So it's a really hard question because having now OLED for so long, I see blooming from like down the street.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say cleanliness of image and that shadow detail and how sharp it looks, I do notice when Samsung mats it out. I do notice how when we're watching, especially the Q190A, when I was watching the Q190A, certain content was very clean, very sharp. And then it would seem like that next scene would be very flat.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was almost saying, okay, ready, we're going to bloom. Let's put seatbelts on. And I was more allergic to that than I was the blooming, if that makes sense.
And
So
that's interesting. Yeah.
it would almost dull out that scene. And I
Mm-hmm.
know I experienced that with the Q1 900R, which is generations ago. But I would see that even with the Q190A and with the Q190B. There were certain scenes where when I would compare them, this one still looked cleaner, though it did bloom more. But then the Samsung almost like put up a shield. Like, how they talk about the S95 being more gray in bright room?
Right.
Almost like it's protecting itself. And I'm
Yeah.
more allergic to that than I am the blooming, at least in this instance.
So this will be interesting. I'm going to look for scenes in the 8K shootout, because 8K, you have three different technology. Well, not three different, but three approaches. Sony doesn't bring in an OLED in the 8K. Sony has their Z9K, which has way more dimming zones in the backlight master drive than the X95K. So you should have Sony's additional detail and depth. The question is whether the Z2 will crush any of that detail, because OLED still arguably It's supposed to have a touch more crushing, but we'll see. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And the Q900B, does it do anything differently than its 4K siblings? Does it crush too much detail? And that's what I'm going to be looking for in the 8K shootout, because this gives Sony something to talk about when they can say, look, I know you're looking at color accuracy or contrast. Our contrast may not be as great as OLED, but look, we have additional shadow detail that may not be, and it's 85-inch, so it's more obvious, right? 65 might be harder to see. So I'm hoping and I think the darker scenes that may have that would be the Harry Potter one where you're on a black
they're on the mountain.
Right? Doing that, right?
What
There's
a hard scene.
Oh my God. A lot of shadow detail there. Possibility for the OLEDs to crush. That's why they chose that scene. It'll be interesting because I'm going to look for that, because they're going to say, oh, look, and second argument, look, the Z9K has slightly more lifted blacks, but another response, but is there more detail? Are you seeing more shadow detail? That's why they're looking at to see the detail, and is that important to you?
Yeah. Well, and I think, you bring up a good point about their approach, because one thing as Sony has done since they've introduced 8K, starting with the Z9G, Z8H, Z9J, if you want the best LED from them, you have to go 8K.
Yeah.
Where Samsung has, for better or worse, I guess it's a bit of both. You at times were better off going with the 4K. The way they handle their pixel density, the light penetrating, it seemed like the 8K wasn't as bright as the 4K in years past. So with the Z9K, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's interesting what we're saying. The way they handle blooming, does it make less light penetrate, especially in 8K with the extra pixels? Is that why they have a hard time penetrating the pixels, where Sony, leaving shadow detail, they're able to have these light cannons with the Z9G, Z9J, because they're clearly brighter. You would think Samsung would be brighter at the 8K lineup. So it's interesting, those two different approaches are showing up.
And that began happening last year with the Neo QLED Mini LED series. That's when Samsung's 8K really torched up the brightness. And this year, the 4K as well, I think it's just across the board. Mini LEDs this year from Samsung really has made a difference in brightening everything up, which is great. We love to see it, especially if you're in a bright room, right? Because content doesn't get that bright. This is for watching sports and, of course, gaming, but there's no content out there that needs over 1,000 nits. Very rare few. So it's not about HDR content, really. It's about just enjoying watching soccer, football, basketball in a brighter room. Golf, you want to see that bright ball whizzing by. Yeah, stuff like that.
Remember last year, though, I think it was during the Projector shootout. It was one of the scenes where the girl was in the red dress. She had red lipstick and the red dress. And the Samsung was completely inaccurate. But we're like, looks damn good, though.
Yeah.
Remember, it was like the color was bleeding everywhere. And everybody was like, yeah, that's not accurate. But everyone was looking at that panel. So I think that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And I think that's something, what we've all talked about with our buddies, is that I like accuracy to a point. I was a plasma fan, but I do prefer, again, some of the extra processing. I do like a brighter image. I do like a cleaner image. So again, you and I could talk for hours. Let's go back to 4K. Where do you see this battle? Do you discount the two mini LEDs in this conversation and go right to the QD-OLEDs versus the G2? Do you feel that they shouldn't even be included, the two LEDs?
Okay, the X95K should not be included, mostly because the blooming, I feel, is a distraction in a dark room. I understand Sony's position about bringing out the detail, but that's better in a brighter room. In a brighter room, the blooming is more muted. But in a pitch black room, which will be in nearly pitch black, it's too much of a distraction. The judges cannot get over the distraction, and nor should they, right? And the QN90B has significantly better blooming control. That lack of distraction alone pushes it towards the QN95B. So the X95K, I don't think should be there unless they get their blooming under control while preserving what Sony wants, the shadow detail. I think it's possible. They just need to work on their processing. Samsung's closer to doing that than Sony. It's just they need to work on their processing to bring out more shadow detail without losing it to graininess
Or-
is the best way to describe it.
And what's so funny about the X95, we got to talk about this, is that I unboxed the 85-inch and I was blown away. And then the 65-inch made the rounds to you guys and was absolutely slapped around. And it made us both look like we were full of crap. And then we finally got our hands on a 65. This 65, though, has been updated to the newer, and it's better. So let's hope.
Firmware is better, but
so let's see how it does together, because the zone count definitely with LEDs, the larger the better for all you guys out there that want to purchase LEDs. You do end up with a, obviously a higher zone count. So I can't wait to see how it does. Where do you see the G2? Well, let me go back really quickly to the S95. Do you feel any of these updates are going to bring it in to being more accurate now than it was at launch? Is that going to help it here versus the A95?
Because it's not out of the box, you're calibrating it anyway.
Okay.
So these, like I said, if you calibrate these TVs, it takes all their out of the box advantages, wipes it off. Now all TVs are calibrated, so it doesn't matter how it is out of the box. And the S95B, even before the updates, when I had it calibrated, it was amazing after calibration, especially if you're doing HDR images, right? So the advantage that Sony might have out of the box is neutralized with the calibration of the S95B, and then pulling it down from 1500 max peak brightness to 1000. Worst case, it matches the Sony. But maybe the model they have sent to Robert has the old firmware and they don't update it, and maybe
see that's the only problem is that.
Well, I mean, should we tell Robert not to update the firmware and use it out of the box? What would happen then?
So here's the problem: is even when I did the QN95 unboxing, I said I had to unbox 2 of them. It kept wanting me to update it.
Yes,
it did, and I'm like, I can't show this thing unupdated, and then I'm the first video of that, and then all of a sudden it's not the accurate one. So, and that's the problem with Samsung. I hate having to hold my breath. As it takes an update. And then as I was filming it, I'm thinking, okay, is this what it's supposed to look like? Is this? So I'm glad that we have several samples of the QN95 to play with. But that's my issue with Samsung is the S95B that I first, again, we're beating a dead horse. I first experienced being an LED fan, FOMO. It's probably the best TV I've ever seen.
Which one? Which one?
The S95.
Yeah,
like in its purest form, and it's like Dragon Ball Z anime form. That thing, I want to take it home. So, so I think, and if somebody has that, look, we're not picking on it. It's just what Samsung's doing right now. But okay, so let's go back into where you predict. People are gonna say the prediction. Why is it an hour in? And I'm not going to edit this down that much, so it's going to be an hour. But let me hear what your predictions are for. So we have Z2. Now let's go into 4K. Where do you feel we're going to see the winner?
Okay. Winner, definitely QD-OLED over any other TV because it has more saturated color, accurately saturated colors, especially in the brightest areas. And unlike the QLED, which may match it in some instances, black levels and contrast will be visibly great in many scenes, especially that Harry Potter one where you're rotating, right? You can have great blacks on the QD-OLEDs because they're OLEDs essentially in terms of self-emissiveness. So it'll be between the A95K and the S95B. And since the S95B pulled back its peak specular highlights, any shot it had of winning was gone. When it was at 1500 and the Sony's at 900, 900, 1500, that's almost twice as much, right?
So, if I know what I know now,
so
I literally would have just hugged the one they had. I would have pulled it out of the wall. I would have changed the cable, and I would have just kept it as a museum piece and just gamed on it because that thing was unbelievable.
Well, and that's why they got
it's still unbelievable. Let's I
think that's why they got you to update it, because the only way to get the Xbox on your TV direct is to update. So you see that? They didn't make an update that was unnecessary. It's like, oh, you're a gamer? You want to game on our new Xbox?
Hey, Dude, they make you lay in bed going, do you want 144 hertz? You want ultra wide? Yeah. In the meantime, this thing up here keeps asking me if it wants to be updated. I'm like, no, thanks.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
never update them.
you know what you don't need, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if you use an external streamer, it's all good. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and it's not right to tell consumers not to update,
No.
because sometimes the updates are a warranty issue to help your TV last longer. So let's
Of
go back to the
course.
S95B. If
Of
all these
course.
updates, yes, they pull back the brightness, is intended for your TV to last 5 years or more,
Yeah.
do you do it? But if you intend to only keep your TV for 2 years, well, whatever, right? But how many people spend $4,000 or 2,500 or 2,000 on a TV only to cast it off in 2 years? I mean, we do,
No,
because that's
just
what we
us.
do.
But I love what we say.
Some sap. What happened to the TV?
Yeah, but when we talk to guys, it's so funny. I know in our live streams too, we're like, yeah, so what you're gonna do is buy it, then go ahead and get yourself an Apple TV. They're like, I just spent $4,000. You're telling me my smart TV's dumb? I can't use it? I'm like, no, you don't want to use those. Spend another 200 or 300, get the Apple, or get get a Fire one, get the high end one. And they're like, bro, and I'm gonna use one of my HDMI inputs for that.
Yeah,
Yes. But I only have two. I understand. But what I'm saying to you is you need this other device. So
craziness.
yeah, it is crazy. Well, it goes back to what we've always said. There really is no perfect display, which is
No.
why the C1 is still behind me. But so now back real quick. G2 started hot, cooled off with the S95, and then somewhere when the S95 started to get hit a little bit, the G2 now moves in front in a lot of
Okay,
people's picks.
so let's talk about. So there's a difference between winning the King of TVs and winning our recommendation. We got to separate that, right?
Yeah.
A95K wins the King of TVs, but would I recommend it? I would still recommend the G2 over it, mostly because how much does the G2 cost? And how much does the A95?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, right? They're worth $1,000.
And that's really and obviously if we go by value, then the Z2 shouldn't even be in it, because I think the QN900B is it half it's half the price of the Z9K. Z9K is
10,000. Yeah.
Yeah, 10,000, and the Z9K is 10 grand.
Only 10.
Only 10.
So it only literally released in the last few weeks.
Yeah, so it's 10,000. The Z2 I think is 25,000, and then like the Q900 looks like it's a bargain. I think it's 6 grand, 6,000.
Well, if we're talking 25,000, what do you think of the 4K 97-inch G2 coming out? Does that render the Z2 8K pointless at 25 or whatever thousand? I mean, you're talking.
Oh, you mean from that? What's the name of the company?
This is LG G2.
Oh, the G2. Oh, the problem I think is the G2. It would render it. Yes, it would render pointless if it wasn't equally as expensive, or if not more money. So, because I know
27,000. That's about the same expense as the whatever. Oh no, it's less expensive than the 8K 88-inch. I think. I think it's not 35,000.
I think it's 25 right now.
25. Okay, so you're getting an extra 10 inches to 97 inches. So about that, right?
So the funny thing is, you and I were both pondering this when the G2 was announced. We're like, yeah, forget this projector crap. I'm gonna grab a G2 for 12 grand. And then they're like, price. Actually, I'm not doing that either. Remember, we're like, I'm still getting a G2. What's the price? Oh no, I'm fine. Actually, no thanks. I'll just grab 4 of these. So back to this is why you and I are better on live streams. Back to our conversation. For me, I think the A95K will win it. To your point, you just said it, is we are looking at overall picture quality. I think even gaming, and as you mentioned, our recommendations are primarily on value and use case. LG being a gaming panel, which very good movie performance, tends to get the better overall and value. Where Samsung full array, now they have the QD-OLED, so that's going to be interesting. But when we talk about that, I do think the A95K's processing, the way they're treating the colors, I think they are going to pull it out slightly. But I wouldn't be surprised if the G2 comes in.
You know, I have a funny A95K story, and that has to do with my weekend in Kansas City, right? We had
Mhm.
a projector face-off, 8 top-notch projectors. And we all know projectors, definitely worse contrast, just bigger, less saturation, less HDR experience, and these are all projector people, right? So they're paying 20,000, 10,000, 12,000, 28,000 for these amazing projectors, right? And so to them, when they're paying 20 grand, they're seeing rich colors, bright
Yeah.
low black levels, and then Sony throws out the A95K in the midst of these people, and we know how good the A95K is. I mean, it's even better than the G2. And some of these people have OLEDs, right? This is, they have a TV, 65, 77 inch, and then their real home cinema, 120 inch, $20,000 projector. They walk by the A95K and their jaw just drops. They go,
Yeah.
and the first thing they ask me is, "Does it come in a 77 inch?" I'm like,
You know
"Nope."
what it is?
They're
Well,
like,
you know what it is?
"Oh."
It's like when you put the v
And
the preference monitor in the middle, and you're like, "Oh my
they're
god,
like,
it's so cute. How much is that? 30 grand." Oh, okay.
you just cannot pull your eyes away. It is
Yeah.
so, and so they have that there. So Sony's pretty cool. They had the A95K there.
Mhm.
Then next to it, 150 inch
Yep.
GTZ 380, which is $80,000 projector,
Mhm.
10,000 lumens. And it is the only projector that gave me even a sense of HDR. None of the others did, right? Because
Yeah.
next to that, they had their new 7000 ES, which is like 28,000, not cheap, but that GTZ 380. So now I realize to get a slight HDR impact, we're talking 10,000 lumens. Any projector that hits 10,000 lumens laser, we're talking $80,000 today, maybe tomorrow 50. And I mean, even as the price goes down, we're still over 30,000 in the next few years.
Honey, we're selling the car. I need a
At
car.
150 inches, but
Yeah.
you get all of that and more in a 65-inch QD OLED. And so it's so hard to tear. At the
Yeah.
end, though, my conclusion is, but it's so big.
Yeah,
I'll,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, that was the one thing. The black levels were low enough and the brightness was high enough that,
Yeah.
okay, at 80 grand, I'll make do. But the thing is, 80 grand, I'm back
Yeah.
to square one again.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's to your point, when you introduce this part of the conversation, you're like, less contrast, less HDR, less black level. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's so big and
So it sounds like
beautiful.
I'm doing it with a lot less than I have behind me.
Immersion is very well. We always say size is immersion. I think
Yeah.
we spend so much time on niche and whatever, but size is immersion. And yeah, visiting the home theaters, it's all about the whole package. So
Yeah, and I'll
I
definitely
love it.
grab the link of that video and your experience, and we'll put that below. You can check
Yeah,
out FOMO's whole journey.
I'm actually editing right now. The minute I
Yeah.
get off, we'll finish, and I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah. When
post.
you're done, let me get the link to that, and I'll link it below. So jumping back, we have, what do we think? What do you
We
think
have
the
what?
win, the 4K winner?
The 4K winner. It's got to be the A95K.
Okay. So we're going to finish up here with the overall. We are going to have a competition overall with the 4K winner versus the 8K winner this year. You will see
Overall,
there will
A95.
Okay, so we will see an overall. What's going to be interesting is we are going to have upconverted. The demo material will be 4K on the 4K, obviously. There will be a downscaled and upscaled. Then you'll see the same demo with native 8K compared to an upscaled 4K. So you'll see 4K demo with its 4K. You won't see a downscaled 8K. You'll see native on both, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And you still think the A95K wins that?
I absolutely do, because we are critical. And when it comes to being critical, it really is about the colors and the saturation and the brightness. The Z2 will have the black levels equivalent to the QD-OLED, but it cannot match the colors because it's still a WOLED. You
Yeah.
still have the weaknesses of a WOLED,
Mhm.
and you're not going to get those saturated skin tones. It's just
Yeah.
can't come close.
So
And the brighter, the A95K specular highlights will get brighter than Z2. Z2 does not have a heat sink, so
and that's where the Z2 is like the ZX, a black box. I felt the ZX was brighter than the A90J last year, even though it had no right being. But then again, it was 88 inches. Maybe that was size. I felt that it was more rich than the A90J last year. I don't think I'm going to feel that way this year. I think the Z2 is an improvement over the ZX, but how much? But I do feel the A95K is a large just like the S95B, it's a large jump. I do feel it's a large jump. We mentioned in a lot of the content that we compare, OLEDs will look very similar if they don't reach a certain color or specular highlights, but I do feel QD-OLED is the jump we were waiting for. And I do feel the A95K will win them both. It will be the overall champion.
Absolutely. I mean, we expected it before it was even announced. When we found out that QD-OLED will be there for the Sony, I didn't know about the Samsung come so early.
Yeah,
we've already predicted. Oh well, if the A95K QD-OLED is coming from Sony, it's going to win.
Yeah. Well, because the accuracy and this and that. But when I first saw the S95, though, I cannot lie, on that video, I'm like, I don't even have the shootout. Don't even bother. Samsung, $3,000, you're in. You have the champion. So
now 400, you're even more in.
I guess we could have done this video in 10 minutes, but I guess what it shows you is, for those of you watching, because I know a lot of our shared communities, this is how we speak on the phone off of being online. This is really a conversation that Fomo and I have when we're talking on the phone or we all talk together. But this, if you think about the way we look at displays, the way you guys do as our communities, think about 2 days of judges and professionals poring over these displays. It's not a quick look. It is a very thorough analysis, and it's a long process. I mean, they're calibrating them all week this week. They've already began, and I do believe
how decisions have to be made. White point, skin tones. I mean, a lot goes behind these calibrations.
Well, and QD being new this year, I'm sure there was a lot of trial and error with calibrating
special equipment. Not everyone can calibrate a QD-OLED.
Yeah, and I'll be featuring that equipment again Thursday evening. I'll be there late. That video will be up. This video will be up tomorrow morning. And then I'll have one Thursday night where as soon as I get home, I'll be spending time with Dwayne Davis, Jason Dustle, and John Reformato. I'll be showing you guys all of their equipment. I'll have them mic'd up to tell you how expensive it is. A lot of you guys are familiar with the equipment anyway. But we are kind of pre-gaming it. And I know you and I are thinking about doing some streaming maybe Saturday evening to talk about where we are.
Wrap up show.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll be going out. Maybe we'll do that. Well, I mean, I know we're staying in a different hotel. Maybe we'll do that in the hotel bar this time. Last year, if you guys remember, we were all over the city walking around. So we might not do much of that. I think we're going to keep it a little. We'll party, but we'll do more of the partying at the actual shootout versus the after. But expect content from all of us throughout. But Fomo, any parting words before we finish up the video?
Well, definitely catch it. We will be there and catch our live stream at some point after the shootout, maybe a little bit of a sneak preview during the shootout. We're going to have a lot of fun, but you guys have to put your alerts on because it'll be unexpected surprises that we don't know about that we might want to throw out there so you guys can catch it. So yeah, if you haven't subscribe to Brian's Tech Therapy Whisper Status 74 channel.
Yeah, and obviously my man Fomo. But we are going to be kind of guerrilla warfare the way we'll be throwing things out. I know definitely this year we'll be looking to do also a lot more of us connecting with engineers, connecting with people that'll be there. It's going to be a much better event this year because last year, if it was a lot of, we were all masked up. We were all, it was very tight that way. Even though it's not open to the public, I do feel a more relaxed. This conversation last year, people still had masks on. It was very difficult to get people, hey, come talk to me for half an hour. So it'll definitely be a better, but for our picks, we both agree. We got to the same result. We do feel that we will have the Z2 as the 8K winner, King of TVs, as well as the A95K, and that we both have the QD-OLED A95K Master Series winning the overall. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. What's your pick? What do you guys think? Check out Fomo, Fomo. I don't have to tell you to check him out, but definitely check out his channel. The stream will be on Shane at SpareChange. He'll be streaming Saturday and Sunday all day. We'll be having some commentary here and there on that as well. But I look forward to seeing you guys. And we'll both, I'm sure, and you have a video releasing. When is your projector video releasing?
First thing tomorrow morning. So sometime this week before before the TV shootout for sure. So I'm hoping Thursday.
Okay, so we'll look for, look, check out FOMO, and then he'll send me the link to attach to this video, and you'll be able to see his work, because I know there was a lot of trial and error.
It's an 8 projector shootout.
Yeah.
JVC NZ9, NZ8, NZ7, Sony 7000 ES, 6000 ES, 5000 ES against Epson's best laser LS 12000 against last year's JVC NX5 or the year before that. So it's a comparison, and the price ranges from $5,000 all the way up to $28,000.
Yeah, so I can't wait, and that's something I'll definitely try to join you in next year. If I fly out there, but you can see
I'm barbecued out. I've never had so much. Kansas City, 4 days of barbecue and pizza. I think no fruit, no vegetables, just barbecue and pizza for 4 days. I'm like,
so when I see you at the shootout, you're gonna be sitting there like, FOMO, you want to drink? No, I have this green thing here.
More vegetables, please.
Yes, please. I'll take a V8. All right, brother. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Guys, check out my man FOMO. You guys know him. Like and subscribe. We will see you guys at the shootout. We'll both have content. FOMO, thank you so much for being here tonight, man. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, buddy. Later, Brian.
All right, love you guys. Take care.